She chased her puppy into the Mafia boss's car. Her dog refused to leave his side. The smell of stale coffee and disinfectant clung to Emily Ross's scrubs, a scent she was convinced had permanently seeped into her skin. It was 5 in the evening, the sky over Westbridge bleeding into a bruised purple, and she was already exhausted. Her shift at the clinic had been brutal, a 12-hour marathon of anxious pet owners and surgical fluids, and now she faced the second half of her day, a 6-hour shift at the diner, serving lukewarm gravy to truckers. In her bank account sat $37.42. Taped to her apartment door was an eviction notice, pink and mocking, giving her until the first of the month. She was drowning. The only thing keeping her head above water was the chaotic, loving, 4-legged creature currently pulling her arm from its socket. "Bolt, heel!" Emily commanded, her voice cracking with fatigue. Bolt, a 5-month-old golden retriever who was more chaotic than canine, interpreted heel as charge. He lunged forward, his new leash, a cheap nylon rope she'd bought at the dollar store, snapping taut. "No, Bolt. Come on, boy, I'm not kidding," she pleaded, digging her worn sneakers into the pavement. She was walking him through the nice part of town. A stupid detour she took because the wide, clean sidewalks of the financial district were better lit than the cracked pavement near her own crumbling apartment building. It was a decision she was beginning to regret. Bolt was a hurricane of puppy energy, fueled by the city's electric hum. He wanted every discarded wrapper, every skeptical pigeon, and every well-dressed ankle that hurried past. "I just want to get home," she muttered to him, yanking the leash. "We have 10 minutes, buddy. Then I have to go, or Mr. Henderson will fire me. Please." Bolt seemed to consider this, tilting his head. Then he spotted freedom. With a sudden, violent twist that spoke of his future 90-pound self, the puppy wrenched the nylon leash from her tired, lotion-slicked hand. The red rope slithered through her fingers, leaving a raw, stinging burn. "Bolt, no!" The cry was ripped from her throat. He was fast. He bounded down the sidewalk, a flash of joyful, golden fur, his tail wagging like a metronome set to chaos. "Bolt, come back!" Emily sprinted, her heart leaping into her throat. Her backpack, heavy with textbooks she hadn't opened in weeks, slapped painfully against her spine. She dodged a woman in a business suit, earning a sharp curse. She didn't care. Bolt was her world. He was the only thing in her entire, miserable life that was truly hers. He was running toward the Sovereign Grand Hotel, a monolith of black glass and old-world marble that looked down on the rest of the city. A place she only ever saw from the outside, smelling the expensive perfume of its patrons as they stepped out of cars that cost more than her entire college tuition. Bolt, oblivious to class divides, saw the hotel's brightly lit entrance not as a barrier, but as a new adventure. "Bolt, stop!" she screamed, terror making her voice shrill. A car was waiting, not a taxi, but an SUV, parked in the red zone directly in front of the lobby. It was a matte black monstrosity, so dark it seemed to absorb the streetlights. It looked less like a vehicle and more like a piece of military hardware. It idled with a low, threatening rumble that vibrated in Emily's chest. A man in a sharp black suit stood by the open rear passenger door, scanning the street. Bolt, in his infinite, terrifying puppy wisdom, saw the open door as a personal invitation. He veered off the sidewalk, cleared the curb in a single clumsy leap, and shot into the dark interior of the SUV. Time stopped. The man in the suit hadn't even registered the dog. He was looking at the hotel lobby. Emily didn't think. She didn't pause. She followed the dog. "Bolt!" she shrieked, launching herself off the curb, her hand outstretched. She grabbed the heavy, armored door of the SUV just as the suit was turning, his eyes widening in confusion. She didn't wait for permission. She yanked the door wide open, bending down to dive in after her dog. "Bolt, get out! Get out right now, bad dog!" And then she froze. The interior of the car was dark, cool, and smelled impossibly clean, like expensive leather and something faintly spicy, like sandalwood. It was dead silent, the city's noise instantly erased by soundproof glass, and there was a man sitting inside. He wasn't just a man. He was a presence. He was dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like it had been stitched onto his frame. Dark, charcoal gray, with a sliver of white collar and a black tie. His hair was dark, thick, and brushed back from a face that looked like it had been carved from hard, unforgiving marble. He hadn't been moving. He was sitting in the profound stillness of a predator, waiting. Emily was half in, half out of the car, her gaze locked with his. His eyes were the darkest brown she had ever seen, and they held her, not with surprise, but with a sudden, calculating intensity. And Bolt was on the plush floor mat, wiggling, his tail thumping, licking the man's gleaming, handmade leather shoe. The man in the suit outside the car finally reacted. He grabbed Emily's arm, his fingers digging into her bicep like steel bands. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Get away from the car!" Another man, who seemed to materialize from the driver's seat, was suddenly at her other side. "Let her go." The voice came from inside the car. It was low. It was quiet. It wasn't a request. The man holding her arm released it instantly, as if he'd been burned. He took half a step back, his face pale. Emily was left kneeling on the asphalt, staring at the man in the darkness. I'm sorry," she stammered, her words tumbling out. "My dog, he ran. He jumped in. I didn't mean—" She looked down. Bolt had now graduated from the man's shoe. He had hauled himself up onto the pristine leather seat and was actively trying to lick the man's face. The man, who had not moved a single muscle, finally shifted. He raised a hand, a large, powerful hand with clean, short nails, and placed it on Bolt's head. Bolt instantly collapsed into a puddle of blissful fur, squirming under the touch, thumping his tail against the expensive upholstery. The man looked from the dog to Emily. A flicker of something, not quite a smile, but a shadow of amusement, touched the corner of his mouth. "He seems to like me," the man observed. His voice was a deep baritone, a gravelly rumble that vibrated through the small, enclosed space. "He likes everybody," Emily said miserably, still on her knees. "He has no survival instincts. Please, sir, I'm so sorry. Bolt, come on, out." She reached for Bolt's collar. Bolt, the traitor, growled, a low, playful rumble in his chest, but he refused to move. He buried his head deeper into the man's lap. "He doesn't want to go," the man said. "He has to," Emily insisted, panic rising. She could feel the glares of the two bodyguards. He's getting your suit dirty. I'm so sorry. I'll pay for the cleaning. I can't pay right now. But if you give me a bill—" The man's dark eyes traveled over her. He took in the faded, stained scrubs, the cheap, cracked screen phone clutched in her hand, the raw, red burn on her palm from the leash. "Get in," he said. Emily blinked. "What?" "Get in the car." He nodded toward the seat opposite him. "You're letting the cold air in." I can't. I just need my dog. And your dog is in my car." "He doesn't seem to be leaving. So get in." He turned his gaze to the bodyguard. "Antonio, shut the door." It was an order. Emily, caught between the terrifying man inside the car and the two terrifying men outside, scrambled. She fell into the vehicle, landing on the soft leather seat, the door shut behind her with a heavy, final thunk, plunging the world into absolute silence. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding into traffic so smoothly she didn't even feel the motion. She was in an armored car with a stranger whose men moved with the quiet efficiency of trained soldiers. She looked at the man. He was watching her. "My name is Emily." "Dominic," he replied. "Just Dominic." He leaned forward slightly, and the dim lights of the dashboard illuminated the hard planes of his face, the tension in his jaw, the faint, silvery scar that cut through one dark eyebrow. Dominic Moretti. The name clicked in her brain with the cold, sharp shock of a bullet chambering. This wasn't just a man. This was the man. The man the newspapers called the Shadow of Westbridge. The man whose construction companies and import businesses were rumored to be fronts for something much older, much darker, the head of the Moretti family. Emily's blood ran cold. She had just chased her puppy into the personal vehicle of the city's most infamous and allegedly most ruthless Mafia boss, and he was scratching her dog's ears. "Where do you live, Emily?" he asked, his voice calm. She told him the cross streets. She was too scared to lie. He relayed the address to the driver in a quiet murmur. They drove in silence for several long, agonizing minutes. Emily sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap. Bolt, the little Judas, had fallen fast asleep on Dominic Moretti's lap. "You're a nurse?" he asked, gesturing to her scrubs. "Vet tech," she corrected him automatically. "I'm a veterinary student, or I'm trying to be." Trying. The word, spoken in that low rumble, seemed to demand the truth. "It's expensive," she said, her voice small. "I work 2 jobs, the clinic, and I'm a waitress at the Silver Star Diner." "The Silver Star? On 3rd Street." She nodded, surprised he knew it. "I'm late for my shift." "They can wait," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. He looked at her again, his gaze unnervingly thorough. "You live alone?" "Yes," she swallowed. "Just me. And Bolt. He's a bad dog," Dominic noted, his fingers still moving through the puppy's soft fur. "He's not bad," Emily said, a flash of defensiveness cutting through her fear. "He's just energetic. He's smart. He just needs training. I haven't had time." "You don't have time because you're working. To pay for a school you can't afford, to live in a neighborhood you're afraid to walk in." It wasn't a question. He was reading her life story from her cheap shoes and her tired eyes. She felt exposed, stripped bare. She just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The car slowed, turning onto her street. The run-down brownstones and overflowing trash cans looked even grimmer from the windows of this silent luxury tank. The car stopped in front of her building. The bodyguard, Antonio, was out and opening her door before she could even move. "Come on, Bolt," Emily said, her voice shaking. She reached for the dog. Dominic Moretti gently lifted the sleeping, heavy puppy and placed him in her arms. Bolt grumbled in his sleep but didn't wake. For a moment, her hands brushed his. His skin was warm, his grip steady. It was a strange, grounding contact. "Thank you," she whispered, backing out of the car, clutching the 70-pound dead weight of her dog. "And I'm sorry again. Emily." She paused, halfway onto the sidewalk. He was holding her phone. She hadn't even realized she'd dropped it on the seat. He didn't hand it back. Instead, he held out his own. "Your number," he said. Her hand trembled as she took his phone, a sleek, heavy piece of black metal that probably cost more than her rent, and typed in her number. He handed her phone back. When she looked at the screen, a new contact was saved. Just one name, Dominic. "Keep your dog on a stronger leash," he said. "I will. And," he added, his eyes holding hers, "I expect you to call me—" "Why?" The word was out before she could stop it. His gaze flickered to the dog in her arms. "In case Bolt misses me again." The door shut. The black-on-black SUV pulled away, silent as a shark disappearing into deep water. Emily stood on the cracked sidewalk, her arms aching, the warmth of her puppy seeping through her scrubs. She stared at the empty space where the car had been, her heart hammering a frantic, uneven rhythm against her ribs. That night, she was fired from the diner. She was too late. Mr. Henderson hadn't even let her explain. She went home, locked the 3 bolts on her flimsy door, and fed Bolt. She sat on her second-hand couch, the eviction notice staring at her from the kitchen counter. She was fired. She was broke. She was terrified. But as she sat there, she realized she wasn't just terrified. She opened her phone and looked at the new contact, Dominic. She thought about the way he had looked at her, not with pity, like her professors, not with hunger, like the men at the diner. He had looked at her with recognition. She remembered the strange, impossible feeling she'd had in that car, surrounded by armored steel and a man who radiated lethal power, with her disloyal dog asleep on his lap. She had felt, for the first time in months, completely and utterly safe. That night, Emily Ross didn't dream about the eviction, or the tuition, or the manager who had yelled at her. She dreamed about the scent of sandalwood and leather. She dreamed about a deep, quiet voice that commanded the world to stop. And she dreamed about dark. intense eyes that saw straight through her, and the tension in a strong jaw, as if the man was holding back a force he was afraid to unleash. The 2 days following her encounter with Dominic Moretti were a special kind of hell. Emily's part-time job at the diner was gone. She'd gone in the next morning, hoping to apologize on her way back, only to find Mr. Henderson looking pale and flustered. He'd barely met her eyes, simply muttering that her final check was in the mail, and that it was better for everyone if she moved on. She knew, with a certainty that settled like ice in her stomach, that Dominic was responsible. Now, her meager savings were dwindling to nothing. The eviction notice on her door served as a constant, flapping reminder of her failure, and Bolt, her beloved, traitorous puppy, had become impossible. He spent hours by the apartment door, whining. It was a low, mournful sound that grated on her already fractured nerves. When she took him out, on a new, thick leash she'd spent her grocery money on, he pulled constantly, relentlessly, in one direction, downtown, toward the black glass tower of the Sovereign Grand. "He's not your friend, Bolt," she grumbled, planting her feet on the sidewalk as the dog strained against his harness. "He's a Mafia boss. You can't just go visit the Mafia boss." Bolt, of course, disagreed. He'd had a taste of the high life, the armored car, the soundproof silence, the reverent ear scratches from a man who smelled like power, and her tiny, drafty apartment just wasn't cutting it anymore. On the third morning, she was sitting at her tiny particle board table, staring at a stack of bills she couldn't pay. She was drinking watery, instant coffee, trying to summon the energy to go to the library and use their computers to search for a new job. Bolt was, predictably, whining at the door. Then, the whining was joined by a new sound, a knock. It wasn't the light, papery tap of the landlord. It was a solid, heavy thud, as if the person on the other side was striking the very center of the door with their fist. Emily froze. Bolt stopped whining and let out a sharp, excited bark. "Bolt, quiet!" she hissed. She crept to the door, her heart hammering. She looked through the peephole, but the fisheye lens showed only the chest of a man in a dark, expensive suit. Antonio. She fumbled with the chain, her hands shaking. "Who is it?" "Emily." The voice wasn't Antonio's. It was his. Dominic. It came through the thin wood of the door, low and vibrating, and she felt it clear in her bones. She slid the chain back and opened the door. He was standing in her dim, peeling hallway. He was not in a tuxedo, but in another perfectly tailored suit, this one a dark navy, with an open-collared white shirt. He looked impossibly large, impossibly out of place, like a panther in a rabbit hutch. Antonio stood a few feet behind him, a silent statue. Bolt exploded. He scrambled past Emily, wiggling and barking, his tail a blur. He jammed his nose into Dominic's immaculate trouser leg, sniffing in pure, unadulterated joy. Dominic looked down at the dog, then up at her. His dark eyes took in her faded gray sweatshirt, the sleep mussed hair she'd pulled into a knot, and the fear in her eyes. "You had me tracked," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," he replied, not a flicker of apology in his tone. He bent down and gave Bolt a firm scratch behind the ears. The dog instantly melted, rolling onto his back. He was agitated, Dominic said, his gaze fixed on the dog. "I was in the neighborhood." Emily almost laughed. The only reason a man like Dominic Moretti would be in the neighborhood was if he owned the building, or was planning to burn it down. "You're a bad liar," she said, before she could stop herself. His eyes snapped up, a spark of surprise in their depths. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Am I?" "Come in," she said, stepping back. What else could she do? He was already here. He stepped inside, and the tiny apartment seemed to shrink by half. He filled the space, his presence absorbing all the air and light. He looked around, taking in the single room, the sagging couch that doubled as her bed, the hot plate on the counter next to a tiny, rattling mini fridge. It was clean, but it was the clean of poverty, a tidiness that couldn't hide the desperation. "Can I offer you some tea?" she asked, her voice small. "All I have is a bag of Lipton." "Tea is fine." he said. He sat at her wobbly two-person table. The chair groaned under his weight, but he sat with an easy grace, as if he belonged. Bolt settled happily on his feet. Emily turned to the counter, her back to him, and boiled water in a small pot on the hot plate. Her hands were trembling so badly she nearly dropped the mugs. One was chipped. The other had a cartoon drawing of a cat on it. She felt a hot flush of shame. "You were fired from the diner," he stated. She flinched, her back still to him. "How did you know that?" "I spoke with Mr. Henderson." "Spoke with him?" she said, turning around, the steaming pot in her hand. "What does that mean? What did you do?" "I merely ensured his business practices were being properly reviewed," Dominic said, his voice smooth. "He was violating several labor laws. He won't be a problem for you again." She put the pot down with a thud. "You can't just do that. You can't just interfere in my life." "Why not?" he asked, genuinely curious. "It was a problem. I fixed it. That's not how the world works." "It's how my world works," he said, and the gentleness was gone, replaced by the cold steel she'd heard in the car. She brought him the tea. He took the cat mug without comment, his large, powerful hands wrapping around it. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the thump, thump, thump of Bolt's tail hitting the linoleum. He looked at her, his gaze softening. "You're strong, Emily. Stronger than you know, juggling school, 2 jobs, this..." He gestured around the small apartment. "Most people would have broken." His words, spoken in that low, rough voice, hit her harder than any compliment she'd ever received. She felt a sudden, stupid prickle of tears. "I don't feel strong," she whispered, looking down at her own chipped mug. "I feel like I'm failing." "You're not failing," he said. "You're surviving." He sipped the tea. Then, as if it were the most normal topic in the world, he said, "This Saturday is the annual Children's Hospital Gala. I'm attending." Emily blinked, the change of subject giving her whiplash. "Okay, good. I hope they raise a lot of money." "I need a date," he said, watching her. She let out a short, surprised laugh. "What, Mr. Moretti? No, Look at me. Look at this place. I don't go to galas, and I don't usually drink tea from a cat mug," he countered. "But we're both here. I'm not asking for gala material. I'm asking you." "Why?" she asked, her voice small. "You could have anyone." He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "Because you, Emily Ross, are the only person I've spoken to in a decade who hasn't wanted something from me. You didn't even want my help when you clearly needed it. You just wanted your dog." "I can't," she said, shaking her head, the fantasy of it all too much. "I have nothing to wear. I wouldn't know anyone. I can't." "Is that a no?" "Yes, it's a no. I'm sorry." He nodded. A flicker of something in his eyes. Disappointment? He finished his tea, stood up, and placed the mug carefully on the counter. The chair scraped against the floor. "Thank you for the tea." He walked to the door. She felt a strange, hollow ache in her chest. He was leaving. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. He turned back to her. "My driver will pick you up at 7 o'clock on Saturday. A dress will be delivered to you. Don't be late." And then he was gone. She spent the next 2 days in a state of suspended panic. He couldn't be serious. On Saturday afternoon, a heavy, black garment bag arrived, delivered by a man who said nothing, simply handing it to her. She zipped it open. The dress wasn't a dress, it was armor. It was a column of deep, emerald green silk, so dark it was almost black in the shadows. It was impossibly simple, impossibly elegant, and it whispered of old money and quiet power. There were shoes, too. Simple black heels that looked delicate but were surprisingly comfortable. He had known her size. Of course he had. At 7 o'clock, she was standing on the curb, feeling like a child playing dress-up. The green silk was cool against her skin. The black SUV glided to a stop. Dominic was inside, dressed in a black tuxedo. If she thought he looked powerful in a suit, it was nothing compared to this. The stark black and white made him look harder, more dangerous, and devastatingly handsome. He didn't speak when she got in. He just looked. His eyes traveled from her hair, which she'd managed to twist into a passable knot, down the column of her throat, over the smooth silk, and back to her face. He didn't smile, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. It was the loudest compliment she had ever heard. The ballroom at the Sovereign Grand was another world. It was a sea of crystal chandeliers, white flowers, and champagne flutes. The air buzzed with the sound of string music and the murmur of hundreds of conversations. Emily felt her hands begin to clammy. Everyone looked so perfect, so rich, so bored, and they were staring. They weren't looking at her. Not really. They were looking at him. They looked at him with a mixture of fear, respect, and nervous deference. And then their eyes would slide to her, dissecting her, dismissing her. She wanted to run. A warm, heavy hand settled on the small of her back. Dominic. His touch was firm, grounding. "Breathe, Emily," he murmured, his voice so low it was just a vibration against her ear. "They don't matter. You're with me. Look at me." She turned her head, her gaze locking with his, and just like that, the ballroom, the music, the staring faces, they all faded into a distant, unimportant blur. He had built a wall around the two of them. He was fiercely attentive, his focus entirely on her, guiding her through the crowd, his hand never leaving her back. Later, the orchestra began a slow, haunting waltz. I don't really dance," she whispered, her panic returning. "Yes, you do," he said. He didn't ask. He simply put his glass down and led her onto the floor. He put one hand on her waist, his thumb stroking the silk. His other hand took hers, lacing their fingers together. She was stiff as a board, her mind racing. "Follow my lead," he said. He pulled her closer, his hand sliding up her back. She had no choice but to rest her free hand on his shoulder, her fingers touching the crisp lapel of his tuxedo. And they moved. He was a phenomenal dancer, strong, confident, leading her effortlessly, as if they'd been doing this for a lifetime. She stumbled once, and his grip tightened. Holding her steady, she relaxed. She let go. She leaned into his strength, breathing in the scent of him, sandalwood, starch, and something uniquely, darkly male. The world dissolved. There was only the music, the warmth of his hand, and the solid, steady beat of his heart under her palm. She looked up at his face, at the hard line of his jaw and the faint scar through his eyebrow. He was watching her, his expression unreadable but intense. Before she even knew what she was doing, her hand moved, her fingers, small and pale, lifted from his shoulder and brushed his cheek. It was a feather-light touch, a question. He stopped breathing. The world snapped back into sharp focus. He stopped dancing. His eyes, fixed on hers, blazed with a sudden, raw heat. The hand on her back clenched, pulling her hips flush against his, letting her feel the hard, undeniable proof of his body. The music swelled and then, abruptly, ended. He didn't let her go, not for a long, agonizing moment. His chest rose and fell in a deep, unsteady breath. "It's time to leave," he said, his voice a low rasp. The ride back to her apartment was thick with a silence that screamed. The air in the car was too hot, too close. The driver pulled up to her curb. Antonio didn't move to open the door. She turned to him. "Dominic, thank you. For tonight, it was Emily." He said her name. And it was a prayer and a curse all in one. He leaned across the dark space between them. He moved slowly, deliberately, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't move. She couldn't. His lips met hers. It wasn't a fiery, demanding kiss. It was soft, hesitant, and packed with a world of restrained longing. It was a test. His lips were firm and impossibly warm. She let out a small sigh, her eyes fluttering shut. Her hand came up, finding his jaw, her fingers curling into the crisp hair at his nape. The kiss deepened. His other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb stroking her cheekbone as his mouth moved over hers, learning her. It was a kiss of profound, desperate tenderness, a quiet hunger that shook her to her core, and then he broke it. He pulled back, his breathing harsh in the silence. His forehead rested against hers for a second, his eyes closed. He looked pained. "Dominic," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Get out of the car. Emily." His voice was rough, gravelly. She flinched, the words like a slap. "No," he groaned. Seeing her expression, he opened his eyes. They were dark with a conflict that terrified her. Not like that. "Emily, I can't do this." "Do what?" "This." He gestured between them. "I don't want to drag you into my world. You're good. You're innocent. I'm not a child, Dominic," she said, a small spark of anger flickering. "I know you're not." His gaze was heavy, sad. "But you're not a monster. And in my world, you either are one or you get eaten by one." "I don't believe you're a monster," she said, her voice soft. "You should." He leaned back, the space between them once again a chasm. "Go inside. Lock your door." She fumbled for the handle, her body tingling, her mind a riot of confusion. She got out, the cold night air hitting her hot skin. She went inside, her legs unsteady. She locked the 3 bolts, her back sliding down the flimsy door until she was sitting on the floor. The apartment was dark, cold, and silent. The emerald dress felt like a costume. She touched her lips. They were still tingling, swollen from his kiss. She was torn. She was terrified of who he was, of the darkness that clung to him. But she was also terrified by the gentle, protective man she'd seen tonight, the man who danced like a dream and kissed like he was starving. She was caught between desire and fear, and she had a terrible feeling that, for the first time in her life, desire was going to win. Miles away, in a car parked across from the Sovereign Grand, a man lowered a camera with a long lens. He grunted, satisfied. "Well, well," Marco Varelli said to himself, looking at the image on his camera's screen. Dominic Moretti, the shadow of Westbridge, his hand on the back of a nobody in a green dress, looking at her like she was the only person in the world. He made a call. He's got a weakness, a civilian. Find out everything there is to know about her. The gala was held 3 nights ago. 3 nights of Emily replaying that kiss in the armored silence of his car. He had pushed her away, told her he was no good, that his world would eat her alive, and she believed him. But she also believed the desperate, gentle hunger in his kiss, the pain in his eyes when he'd pulled back. She was at work, trying to focus. The Westbridge Animal Clinic was her only sanctuary, the one place she felt competent. She was drawing a blood sample from a nervous beagle, murmuring softly to the dog, her brow furrowed in concentration. "He's a good boy. Yes, you are," she cooed, completely absorbed. "Emily." The voice cut through the sterile quiet of the clinic. It wasn't a call. It was a command. She looked up. Dominic Moretti was standing in the doorway of the examination room. He was not in a tuxedo. He was in dark trousers, a black button-down shirt, and a look of such cold, controlled fury that the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. His presence was a shock, a black hole of violence in her clean, safe world. Dr. Evans, her boss, froze, his mouth open. The beagle started to whine. "Dominic," Emily said, her hand still on the dog, "what are you doing here?" "Get your bag," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You're coming with me." "What? I can't. I'm at work. What's going on?" "Now, Emily." He took a step into the room. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking through her, his jaw so tight she thought it might crack. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's happening," she said, her own fear making her stubborn. His dark eyes finally focused on her. "Your apartment, it's been hit." "Hit?" she repeated stupidly. "What, like robbed?" "Ransacked," he snapped. "A message. They're not amateurs. They knew you were with me. They knew where you lived. Get your bag." A cold dread washed over her, so profound her knees went weak. The break-in at the diner, the gala, and now this. I have to finish with Anna," Dominic called over his shoulder. The young receptionist, who had been staring, jumped. "Give Dr. Evans whatever he needs. Emily is leaving." He didn't wait. He grabbed her arm, not roughly, but with an undeniable, possessive force. "I'm not asking again." He pulled her through the waiting room, past a stunned-looking woman holding a cat carrier, and out onto the street. The black SUV was idling at the curb. He opened the back door and all but pushed her inside. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice trembling as the door shut. "Home," he said, his eyes scanning the street like a hawk. "To see the damage. Then you're coming with me. Dominic, you can't just decide my life. After the other night, you said—" "The other night I was trying to keep you out," he said, his voice raw. "It's too late. You're in. And that means you are my responsibility." The drive to her apartment was silent and terrifying. When they arrived, 2 of his men were standing by her building's entrance. They nodded as Dominic swept past, pulling her with him. He kicked open her apartment door. It was already splintered, hanging off one hinge. Emily stopped dead, her hand flying to her mouth. It wasn't just ransacked, it was destroyed, violated. Her sagging couch was slashed, stuffing pulled out, the small table was overturned, her few textbooks were ripped, their pages scattered. Her tiny mini-fridge was open, its contents smeared on the floor. They had torn open her pillows, her mattress, her one small dresser. They had been looking for something. Or more likely, they had been showing her how easily they could get to her. "Oh, God," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "They touched everything," Dominic said. His voice was terrifyingly calm, a stillness that promised a hurricane. My pictures, the pictures of my mom." She stumbled forward toward a broken frame on the floor. "Don't touch anything," he ordered. "They're gone. Emily, it's all gone." She turned to him, anger and despair warring within her. Who would do this?" "My rival," he said simply. "A man named Marco Varelli. He saw us at the gala. He thinks you're my weakness." "Am I?" she whispered. The tears finally falling, his dark eyes met hers, and the fury was replaced by a look of such pained regret it stole her breath. "Yes," he said. He stepped over the debris and plucked something off the floor. The pink eviction notice, now trampled with a muddy boot print. "You were leaving anyway," he stated. She just nodded, wiping her face. I have nowhere to go. I was going to try a shelter." "No." The word was absolute. "You're coming with me." "To your car? To another hotel? Dominic, I can't live like this. Bouncing around, hiding. Not to a hotel, to my home, to the penthouse. You will stay there. You will be safe." "What about Bolt?" she asked, the practical thought cutting through her panic. "I sent Antonio to get him from your dog walker 2 hours ago," Dominic said. "He's already there." She stared at him. He had known about the break-in for hours. He had retrieved her dog. He had come to her work. His fury contained until he'd seen her, safe and unharmed. He had planned this. "I don't have a choice. Do I?" she said flatly. "No," he agreed. "You don't." The penthouse was less a home and more a fortress in the sky. It took up the top 2 floors of the Moretti building, a sterile, minimalist expanse of glass, steel, and white marble. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Westbridge, but the glass, she knew, was inches thick, bulletproof, bomb-proof. Bolt, however, was in heaven. He greeted her at the private elevator door with a joyful bark, his tail wagging. The guest room Dominic showed her was 4 times the size of her entire apartment, with a king-sized bed and a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a spa. "Bolt can stay with you," Dominic said, standing stiffly in the doorway. My room is on the floor above. This floor is yours. No one will bother you." "Thank you," she whispered, clutching her backpack, which contained her scrubs, her wallet, and her keys, the only thing she had left in the world. The tension in the following days was thick enough to cut. Dominic was there, but he was a ghost. He kept his distance, his face a mask of cold control. He was trying to honor the line he'd drawn in the car, but they were living together. She'd see him in the morning, already in a suit, drinking espresso at the massive kitchen island, his jaw tight as he read reports on a tablet. He'd nod to her. "Good morning." She'd see him at night when he'd return, his tie loosened, the scent of the city and his sandalwood cologne clinging to him. He looked exhausted and dangerous. One night, 4 days after she'd moved in, she found him staring out the massive window at the city lights, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. "You haven't eaten, have you?" she asked softly from the kitchen doorway. He didn't turn. "I'm not hungry. You're going to make yourself sick." She walked into the kitchen, his kitchen, a high-tech marvel of stainless steel he probably never used. She opened the industrial-sized refrigerator. It was full of nothing. Bottles of water, condiments, a plastic container of olives. "You don't have any food," she said, exasperated. "I eat out," he said, finally turning. "Well, I'm starving, and I'm going to order food," she paused. "Or I could cook. If you'd have someone get groceries." A flicker of something, surprise, amusement, crossed his face. "You want to cook?" "I want to do something," she said, meeting his gaze. "I'm tired of being a prisoner. I want to feel normal. Please." An hour later, 2 of his men delivered 4 bags of groceries. She set to work. Simple pasta, garlic, tomatoes, basil. The kitchen was soon filled with the warm, rich scent. Dominic didn't leave. He sat at the island, watching her. His presence was a heavy weight, but she focused on the task, chopping and stirring. "You're good at that," he observed, his voice quiet. "My mom taught me," she said, stirring the sauce. "It was the one thing we did together that was nice." She found 2 plates. She served him, then herself. They ate at the island, in silence. It was comfortable, domestic. Bolt, sensing the change, trotted in and laid his head on Dominic's knee. Dominic automatically started scratching the dog's ears. You seem so tense all the time," she said, pushing pasta around her plate. "Like you're carrying the whole world." "I am," he said, not unkindly. She risked a small joke. "Well, you should put it down, at least for dinner." She smiled at him, a small, tentative smile, and he smiled back. It was not the ghost of a smile from the car. It was a real, small, unguarded lifting of his mouth. It transformed his harsh face, making him look younger and devastatingly sad. Her breath caught. Just as he opened his mouth to say something, the world went black. The lights, the hum of the fridge, the digital clock on the oven, everything vanished. The penthouse was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. Emily dropped her fork. It clattered on the marble floor. "It's just a blackout." Dominic's voice came through the dark, calm and steady, but she wasn't listening. Her heart was a trapped bird in her chest. She couldn't breathe. The darkness was total, pressing in on her, heavy and hot. "Emily?" She was shaking. A low, keening sound left her throat. "No, no, no, no." She scrambled back, knocking her stool over. She hit the counter, her breath coming in short, panic gasps. "Emily!" His voice was sharp now. A small, bright light clicked on. His phone's flashlight. He was in front of her, his face a mask of confusion and concern. She flinched, throwing her hands up to block the light. Please, don't lock it." "Lock what?" He put the phone down. The beam pointing at the ceiling, plunging them back into shadow, but a less absolute dark. "Emily, it's me. It's Dominic. You're safe. Breathe." He gripped her shoulders. His hands were like steel, holding her steady. I can't breathe," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I hate the dark. I hate it." "I've got you," he said, his voice a low, rough rumble. He pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapped around her, pulling her tight, his hand coming up to cup the back of her head. He was so solid, so warm. "I've got you." It was just a power surge. "You're in the penthouse. You are safe. I am right here." He just held her, letting her tremble, letting her sob into his shirt. He didn't push. He just held. After a long time, her breathing slowed, the shaking subsided. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, her face still pressed against the warm, solid wall of his chest. "Don't be sorry," he said, his voice thick. "Tell me why." She was quiet. The secret was old and hard, but he had held her. He hadn't laughed or told her to get over it. My stepfather." she whispered, the words tasting like ash. When I was little, when my mom was at work, if I made him angry, he would lock me in the root cellar. There were no lights. He'd leave me there for hours. She took a ragged breath. I'm still afraid of the dark. The arms around her tightened. She could feel the muscles in his chest and back contract, hardening like stone. He was silent, but he was vibrating with a sudden, terrible stillness. She leaned back, looking up at his face in the dim, reflected light. He was shaken. His eyes were closed, his jaw set, but his expression was one of raw, unfiltered pain. A muscle in his cheek jumped. When he opened his eyes, they were black with a lethal, terrifying rage. But it wasn't for her. Where is he? He asked, his voice trembling with a violence she had never heard. He's dead, she said quickly. He drank himself to death, years ago. It's over. It's not over, Dominic whispered, his hand coming up to cup her face. His thumb was rough, calloused, as it stroked the tears from her cheek. It's not over if it still does this to you. He looked at her, his dark eyes blazing with a fierce, protective devotion that was more potent than any declaration of love. No one, he said, his voice breaking with emotion, will ever touch you again. No one will ever make you feel that way again. I swear on my life, Emily. And then the lights flickered, hummed, and snapped back on. They were in the kitchen, bathed in bright, sterile light. He was holding her face. She was clinging to his shirt. The moment was shattered, but the air between them was electric, charged with confession and promise. He didn't let her go. His gaze dropped to her mouth. You, he breathed, are going to be the end of me. He kissed her. It was not the soft, hesitant kiss from the car. It was a deluge. It was all the fury, all the protection, all the possessive darkness he'd been holding back. His mouth was on hers, hard and hungry, and she met him with equal force, her hands grabbing his face, her fingers digging into his hair. It was a kiss of desperation, a drowning man's last breath. He backed her against the counter, his body pressing her into the cold marble. He broke the kiss only to trail his mouth down her jaw, to the soft pulse point on her neck. Dominic, she gasped. His hands, which had been so gentle, were now trembling with need. He gripped her waist, his fingers digging in, and in one smooth, powerful motion, he lifted her. She let out a small cry as he sat her on the cold marble counter. She was looking down at him, her legs instinctively wrapped around his waist, pulling him closer. His hands were in her hair, his mouth on hers again. It was hot, messy, and perfect. He was a storm, and she was, for the first time in her life, willing to be swept away. He pulled back, his chest heaving, his forehead rested against hers. His hands were gripping the edge of the counter on either side of her, his knuckles white. He was shaking. No, he rasped, his eyes squeezed shut. What? She whispered, confused, breathless. Not like this. He pulled back fully, though his hands stayed on the counter, trapping her. He looked at her, his eyes raw with need and restraint. Not here. Not when you're shaken from that. You deserve more than a desperate grab in a kitchen. He was giving her an out. He was protecting her, even from himself. She looked at him, at this powerful, dangerous man who was trembling because he wanted her, but who was strong enough to stop. She reached out, her hand unsteady, and laid it on his cheek. Thank you, she whispered. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. The moment was broken, but the tension was 1,000 times worse. The line had been crossed, miles away. In a dark van, a man lowered a pair of binoculars. He'd been watching the penthouse, a fool's errand, until the blackout. Now, he had his prize. He picked up a phone. Varelli, it's me. You were right, he's got her in the penthouse. But I just saw something. The power grid for the block went down, and she panicked. It looked like she had a full-blown breakdown. He was holding her. Marco Varelli's voice came over the line, smooth and cold. A breakdown, you say? Interesting. So, our little bird is afraid of the dark. We can use that. Back in the penthouse, Emily felt safer than she ever had in her life, wrapped in the protective orbit of Dominic Moretti. She didn't know that, across the city, a plan was clicking into place. She didn't know that Dominic had just received a text from Antonio, a photo of the van parked 3 blocks away. He looked at Emily, who was shyly starting to clean up the pasta. He looked at the phone. He had brought her here to keep her safe, and in doing so, he had sealed her fate. She wasn't just his weakness. She was the bait. The morning after the blackout, the boundaries of Emily's world shrank to the square footage of the penthouse. Dominic did not ask her to stay. He commanded it, though his voice lacked the sharp edge of their first meeting. He stood by the kitchen island, adjusting his cufflinks, his face drawn and serious. "You cannot leave this floor," he told her, his eyes dark with a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. "My men found a surveillance van 3 blocks away. Varelli knows you are here. If you step outside the lobby doors, I cannot guarantee your safety." Emily stood barefoot on the cold marble, hugging her arms around herself. The memory of the previous night, the panic, his arms around her, the heat of his mouth on hers, still hummed under her skin. She felt exposed, but strangely, she did not feel trapped. "Okay," she said softly. "I trust you." The words seemed to physically strike him. He paused, his hands freezing on his cuffs. He looked at her for a long moment, searching for deception and finding none. He gave a curt nod, grabbed his jacket, and left without another word. For the next week, the penthouse became a sanctuary suspended above the clouds. The fear of the outside world, of evictions and rival gangs, felt distant, muffled by the thick glass walls. Inside, a different kind of tension was building, a slow burn pressure that felt like oxygen filling a room before a spark. Their routine became intimate in its domesticity. Emily would wake early to feed Bolt, who had taken to treating the expansive living room as his personal racetrack. Dominic would emerge from his room shortly after, always dressed for war in his immaculate suits, but his eyes would seek her out immediately. They shared breakfast at the island. At first, it was silent. Then, it became a tentative conversation. "You drink your coffee like you hate it," Emily teased one morning, watching him down a shot of pitch-black espresso. "I drink it for effect, not flavor," he grunted, though the corner of his mouth quivered upward. "Here," she said, sliding her mug toward him. "Try mine. It has oat milk and honey. It actually tastes like something other than despair." He hesitated, then took a sip. He made a face, but he didn't push it back. He took another sip. "It tastes like a dessert. It tastes like joy. Dominic, you should try it sometime." He looked at her then, over the rim of the mug, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I am trying," he murmured. The intimacy deepened in the dark. One night, Emily woke with a gasp, her heart hammering from a nightmare about the cellar before she could even orient herself. Her door opened. Dominic was there, silhouetted by the hall light. He didn't say anything, just crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. He placed his large, warm hand over hers where it clutched the duvet. He stayed there until her breathing evened out, a silent sentinel guarding her from her own mind. 2 nights later, she heard him. A shout muffled by the walls, followed by the sound of something shattering. She found him in the living room, standing amidst the ruins of a whiskey glass he had thrown against the fireplace. He was breathing hard, his shirt unbuttoned, sweat sheening his chest. He looked wild, terrified. She didn't ask. She simply walked over to him, stepping over the glass shards, and took his hand. He flinched, then gripped her fingers so hard it hurt. She led him to the sofa, sat him down, and called Bolt. The puppy, sensing the distress, hopped up and laid his heavy head on Dominic's lap. "My sister," Dominic whispered into the dark, his voice a ragged scrap of sound. "I dreamt I was too late. Again." Emily sat beside him, her shoulder pressing against his arm. "You're not alone. Dominic, not anymore." He turned to her, his eyes searching her face in the gloom. He looked like a man who wanted to believe in salvation but had forgotten how to pray. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Dominic returned home later than usual. The penthouse was quiet. Emily had left a single lamp on in the living room. When he walked in, he moved stiffly, favoring his left side. Emily, who had been reading a textbook on the sofa with Bolt snoring at her feet, stood up immediately. "You're late, She stopped. The light caught his face. His lip was split, swollen and dark. There was a bruise blooming along his jawline, angry and purple. "Dominic," she breathed, dropping her book. "It's nothing," he said, his voice rough. He tried to walk past her toward his room. "Just a disagreement. A disagreement doesn't leave you walking with a limp," she said, her vet tech instincts overriding her hesitation. She stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Let me see. Emily, go to bed." "No." She reached out and touched the side of his shirt. He hissed in pain, his body seizing. The fabric was wet. "You're bleeding. It's a graze. A knife. It's fine." "Sit down," she ordered, pointing to the kitchen stool. "Now." To her surprise, the feared Mafia boss of Westbridge obeyed. He sat heavily, his face pale. Emily ran to the bathroom and grabbed the first aid kit she had organized 3 days ago. When she returned, she stood between his spread knees. Shirt off. He watched her, his eyes heavy-lidded, then slowly unbuttoned his shirt. He shrugged it off, wincing. Emily drew in a sharp breath. His torso was a map of violence, old scars, silver and faded, crisscrossing his skin. But her focus was on the fresh, angry slash across his ribs. It wasn't deep enough for stitches, but it was ugly. "This needs to be cleaned," she said, her voice shaking slightly. She soaked a piece of gauze in antiseptic. "This is going to sting." "Do it." She pressed the gauze to the wound. His muscles jumped under her hand, his stomach rippling with the tension. But he didn't make a sound. She worked efficiently, her hands gentle but firm, cleaning the blood, applying antibiotic ointment, and taping a sterile pad over the cut. She moved up to his face. She took a fresh cloth and dipped it in cool water. She stepped closer, her thighs brushing against his knees. She reached up to dab at the cut on his lip. He hissed softly, his eyes locking onto hers. "Sorry," she whispered. "It's not the pain," he rasped. She froze. Her hand was cupping his jaw, her thumb resting near the corner of his mouth. She could feel the heat radiating off him, a furnace of adrenaline and something else. She looked into his eyes and saw the same hunger she had seen in the car, but stripped of its hesitation. "Why do you do this?" she asked softly, tracing the bruise on his jaw. "Why do you fight?" "To keep the wolves from the door," he murmured. He turned his face into her palm, pressing a kiss to the center of her hand. "To keep them away from you." The sensation of his lips against her sensitive palm sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. She stepped closer, unable to help herself. She was standing between his legs, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "I don't want you to get hurt," she said. "I would bleed every day if it meant you were safe." He said. The confession hung in the air, heavy and absolute. He reached out, his hands settling on her hips. His grip was warm, heavy, grounding. He looked up at her, silently asking for permission he had never asked for before. Emily gave it. She lowered her head and kissed him. It wasn't like the kitchen kiss, born of panic and adrenaline. This was slow, deliberate, a claim. Dominic let out a groan low in his throat and pulled her closer, burying his face in her neck. He inhaled deeply, as if she were the only air left in the world. "Emily," he whispered against her skin. "I can't stop. Not this time." "Don't stop," she replied, her fingers threading through his dark hair. He stood up, wincing slightly from his ribs but ignoring it, and scooped her into his arms. He carried her not to the guest room, but to his room, a space she had never entered. It was dark, masculine, smelling of cedar and rain. He set her down on the edge of the massive bed. He looked at her with a reverence that made her heart ache. He didn't rush. He knelt before her, removing her shoes, his hands treating her feet like they were made of porcelain. He stood and undressed her slowly, his eyes worshipping every inch of skin he revealed when they finally lay back against the cool sheets, skin against skin, The contrast was stark. He was hard muscle, scarred and bruised, a weapon of a man. She had soft curves and pale skin, but when he touched her, his hands were trembling. He moved over her, bracing his weight on his elbows to protect her from his heaviness. "You are so beautiful," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "It hurts to look at you." "Then close your eyes," she whispered, pulling him down. "Never." He kissed her, deeply, thoroughly, and the rest of the world fell away. There was no mafia, no threats, no past traumas. There was only the friction of skin, the heat of their bodies, and the desperate rhythmic language of two lonely souls finally finding their match. He loved her with a fierce, terrifying intensity, making sure she felt every ounce of his devotion. He was careful with her, so careful, checking her eyes, listening to her breath, ensuring that she felt safe, empowered, and cherished, and Emily, for her part, held nothing back. She wrapped herself around him, anchoring him, taking his darkness and offering him her light. Afterward, he didn't pull away. He rolled onto his side, pulling the duvet up over them, and tucked her against his chest, his arm draped over her waist, heavy and possessive. He buried his face in her hair, his breathing slowly evening out. "Mine," he whispered into the darkness, half asleep. "Yours," she answered. The morning sun hit the penthouse windows with a brilliance that felt mocking. Emily woke alone in the massive bed, wrapped in sheets that smelled like him. She stretched, a smile touching her lips as the memories of the night before washed over her. She felt different, changed. There was a note on the pillow. "I had to meet with the captains, back by noon. There is fresh coffee. Stay inside." "D," she smiled, pressing the note to her chest. She got up, pulled on one of his dress shirts that hung to her knees, and went to the living room. Bolt was waiting, tail wagging. She fed him, made herself coffee, and hummed a tune. At 10 o'clock, her phone rang. She picked it up, expecting Dominic. "Hello?" "Miss Ross," a voice said. It wasn't Dominic. It was mechanical, distorted. "Who is this?" "We have a bead on the dog." Emily froze. She looked down. Bolt was happily chewing on a rubber toy near the window. "What? My dog is right here." "Yes," the voice said. "He is in the window, the one facing north. We have a shooter on the roof opposite, high velocity. One pull of the trigger, and the golden retriever becomes a memory." Emily's blood turned to ice. She scrambled toward Bolt, grabbing his collar and dragging him away from the glass. Behind the sofa, "Good reflexes," the voice laughed. It was a cold, dead sound. "But you can't hide him forever. Dominic Moretti cannot protect you. He's busy dealing with a distraction we created across town." "What do you want?" she whispered, clutching Bolt's fur. "We want you. Come down, leave the building. Walk to the corner of 5th and Main. A blue van will be waiting. If you do this, the dog lives. If you don't, we kill the dog, and then we burn that tower down with your boyfriend inside when he returns." I can't leave. Then the dog dies. Now." "No," she screamed. "No, wait, don't hurt him. You have 5 minutes, Emily, or we send Dominic a box of dog pieces." The line went dead. Emily sat on the floor, shaking. Her mind raced. Dominic was gone. He was across town. They were watching. If she stayed, they would kill Bolt. They would kill Dominic. She was the leverage. She was the weakness. If she removed the weakness, Dominic would be free. He wouldn't have to worry about her. He could fight them without distraction. It was a foolish, terrified logic, born of love and panic. She grabbed a piece of paper. Her hands shook so badly she could barely write. "They threatened Bolt. They threatened you. I can't let you get hurt because of me. I'm going to fix this. I love you." She left the note on the kitchen island, right next to his empty espresso cup. "Come on, Bolt," she said, her voice cracking. She clipped on his leash. She didn't take the elevator. She took the service stairs, walking down 40 flights, her legs trembling with every step. She kept Bolt close, shielding his body with hers. She emerged from the service entrance in the alley. The air was cold. She pulled Dominic's shirt tighter around herself. She hadn't even changed, just thrown a coat over it. She walked to the corner of 5th and Main. It was deserted. A blue van screeched around the corner. Mounting the curb, the side door slid open. 2 men in balaclavas jumped out. "Get the girl!" Emily tried to run, but they were too fast. One grabbed her arm, twisting it painfully. "Bolt, run!" she screamed, but Bolt didn't run. The golden retriever, usually a lover of all things human, sensed the threat. He snarled, a sound Emily had never heard, and lunged. He clamped his jaws onto the forearm of the man holding Emily. The man screamed, "Get this thing off me!" The second man raised a small pistol. "No!" Emily threw herself in front of the dog. A sharp hiss cut the air. A dart hit Bolt in the flank. He yelped, staggered, and collapsed within seconds. Emily felt a sharp prick in her neck. The world tilted. The pavement rushed up to meet her. "Load them up." "Both of them." A voice swam through the haze. Darkness took her. 30 minutes later, the elevator doors to the penthouse slid open. "Emily, I brought you—" Dominic started, holding a bag of pastries from the bakery she liked. The silence of the apartment was absolute. It was the wrong kind of silence. It was the silence of a grave. Emily. He walked into the living room. No dog, no girl. He saw the paper on the island. He walked over to it, his steps slow, heavy. He read the scrawled, shaky handwriting. They threatened Bolt. "I can't let you get hurt." The bag of pastries dropped from his hand. A sound ripped from his throat. A roar of pure, animalistic agony that echoed off the glass walls. He swept his arm across the island, sending the coffee maker, the mugs, and the vase of flowers crashing to the floor. He gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white, his head bowed as he gasped for air. The grief was there. Yes. But beneath it, rising like a tidal wave, was a rage so black, so all-consuming, that it terrified even him. He pulled his phone from his pocket. He dialed Antonio. "Get everyone," Dominic said. His voice was dead. It was the voice of a reaper. Every soldier, every favor, every contact. "Boss?" Antonio asked, hearing the tone. "What happened?" "They took her," Dominic said. He looked up, staring at his reflection in the window. The man looking back was not a lover. He was a monster. "Burn it down, Antonio," Dominic commanded. "Burn the whole damn city down until we find her. No one survives this. No one—" The cold hit her first. It wasn't just the air, it was the concrete floor, seeping through the thin material of Dominic's shirt, which she was still wearing under her coat. The drug was a thick, metallic fog in her head, but the cold was a sharp, clarifying pain. She was in a warehouse. The smell of rust, river water, and old oil filled her nose. A single, bare bulb hung from a high, dark ceiling, casting a weak, yellow circle of light. "She's awake." Emily flinched. A man was sitting on a metal chair just outside the light, smoking. Marco Varelli. And he didn't look like a gangster. And he looked like a bored executive, dressed in a sharp, beige suit. "Where is my dog?" she whispered, her throat raw. "The dog is fine," Varelli said, waving a hand dismissively. "For now." He gestured into the shadows. Emily's eyes followed his. A small metal cage sat in the corner. Bolt. He was lying on his side, his breathing shallow. He was still sedated. A raw, protective anger cut through her fear. "If you hurt him," she said, her voice shaking but laced with steel. "Dominic will kill you." Varelli laughed. It was a dry, unpleasant sound. "That's the plan, sweetheart. He'll come, and when he does, he'll be so blinded by, well, you, that he'll walk right into a trap. But first, you're going to make this easier." He stood up, walking into the light. He was holding a small notebook. "Where does he keep his ledgers?" Emily stared at him. "What's a ledger?" He slapped her. The blow was quick, impersonal, and rocked her head to the side, her cheeks stinging. "Don't play stupid," he snapped. "You're living in his house. You're sleeping in his bed. Where does he do his business? Where are the safe houses? What are the shipping routes?" "I don't know," she cried, tasting blood. I'm a vet tech. I make him breakfast. We don't talk about any of that." Varelli studied her, his eyes cold and assessing. "You're lying." "I'm not." She looked him dead in the eye. He protected me from his world. He didn't bring it home. What a shame. Varelli sighed. He checked his watch. Then you're only useful as bait. But I'd still like to break you before he gets here. He looked at her. A slow, cruel smile spreading across his face. I heard a rumor. You're afraid of the dark. He snapped his fingers. Kill the light and, just for fun, move the dog's cage a little further away from her. The light clicked off. Emily was plunged into the absolute suffocating blackness she'd spent her life running from. The cellar, the cold floor, the smell of damp. No, she whimpered, curling into a ball. Dominic! She screamed into the void, a sound of pure terror. Far across town, Dominic was also in a dark, cold room. It was the walk-in freezer of a butchery he owned. He was not the one who was cold. He had one of Varelli's captains, a man named Russo, chained to a meat hook. Russo was purple, his teeth chattering so hard they sounded like rattling dice. You have nothing, Russo spat. A brave, foolish, final act. Dominic, who hadn't spoken in an hour, stepped forward. He was not in a suit. He was in black tactical gear, his face smeared with black paint, his eyes the only human thing visible. And they were not human. She is 5'5", Dominic said, his voice a dead, emotionless rasp. She has blonde hair. Her eyes are the color of a summer storm. She was wearing my shirt. She weighs 122 pounds, and she is terrified of the dark. He picked up an ice pick from a wooden block. You took her. I don't know who you're talking about. Russo shivered. Dominic drove the ice pick into the man's shoulder, just deep enough to hit the bone. Russo screamed, a high, thin sound that was instantly absorbed by the hanging carcasses. I'm not asking for information. Russo, Dominic said, leaning in. I'm not negotiating. I'm telling you that in 60 seconds, I'm going to start carving pieces from you until you are no longer recognizable. You will tell me where she is, or you will die in this freezer, in the dark. One piece at a time. Go to hell, Moretti. Dominic pressed a button on a small remote. A single, powerful floodlight at the end of the freezer snapped on, aimed directly at Russo. Russo cried out, shielding his eyes. Dominic just watched him. He said nothing. He simply waited. 30 seconds passed. The silence. The heat of the light. The agonizing pain in his shoulder. Russo started to sob. The old shipyard, he finally choked out. Warehouse 9. By the water, a trap. Moretti. He's got 30 men. Dominic turned. He walked to the door. Moretti, Russo screamed, panicked. Moretti, get me down. You got what you wanted. Get me down. Dominic paused at the door. 30 men, he mused. He looked over his shoulder, his eyes black pits. He should have brought more. He shut the heavy freezer door, plunging Russo back into the cold and the dark. He left him there. The sky tore open as they reached the shipyard. A violent mid-November thunderstorm had rolled in off the river, lashing the corrugated metal roofs with sheets of rain. Thunder cracked overhead, loud enough to mask a tank. Antonio, Dominic said, his voice a low command over the headset. You take the perimeter. 2 men on the roof. Cut the power. We are ghosts. No one fires until I do. Boss, Antonio said. 30 men. We should wait for... Now, Dominic said. He moved through the rain, a shadow among shadows. His men. 10 of them. The best he had, fanned out, neutralizing the outside guards with silent, brutal efficiency. Dominic reached the main warehouse door. He could hear the storm, the tin roof rattling, and he could hear something else. A faint whimper. He kicked the door. It flew open with a sound like a bomb. The warehouse was dark, but not completely. A few flashlights were on, their beams cutting through the gloom. What the hell was that? A voice shouted. Dominic opened fire. He didn't use a suppressor, he wanted the sound. The muzzle flashes illuminated him for a second, a terrifying specter of vengeance in the doorway. He was not a man, he was a reaper. He moved with a speed and violence that was breathtaking. 2 pistols firing, a controlled, lethal ballet. Men screamed, firing wildly into the dark, but they were firing at a ghost. Dominic was already moving, Using the chaos, the thunder, the rain, his men breached from the roof and the side doors. The warehouse became a charnel house, a symphony of chaos and controlled violence. It was over in 2 minutes. The warehouse was silent, save for the dripping rain and the groans of the wounded. "Emily!" Dominic roared, his voice bouncing off the high ceiling. "Dominic?" The voice was weak, terrified. It came from a small office in the back. He sprinted, kicking the flimsy door off its hinges. The room was pitch black. He fumbled for the light switch. Nothing. Antonio had cut the power. "Emily? Here," she whimpered. He turned on the tactical flashlight mounted on his rifle. The beam cut through the darkness and found her. She was on the floor, curled in a ball. But she wasn't alone. A large man, one of Varelli's, was standing over her, his fist tangled in her hair, dragging her to her feet. "Drop it, Moretti, or I—" The man didn't get to finish. Dominic didn't shoot. The gunshot was too fast. It was too merciful. He dropped his rifle, crossed the 10 feet between them in a single bound, and drove his fist into the man's throat. The man gurgled, his hand releasing Emily's hair as he grabbed at his own neck. Dominic didn't stop. He spun, grabbing the man by the jacket, and threw him against the wall with enough force to crack the drywall. "You—" Dominic grabbed a fistful of the man's hair, just as the man had done to Emily, and slammed his head back against the wall. "Touched." He slammed him again. "Hurt." He pulled the man from the wall and began to beat him, his fists moving with a controlled, rhythmic, piston-like fury. It was not a fight, it was an execution. "Boss!" Antonio was at the door, his gun raised. "Boss, stop! He's done! He's finished! We have her!" Dominic's fist, raised for another blow, was covered in blood. He was breathing like a bull, his chest heaving. He looked at the unconscious, broken man at his feet, and then he looked at Emily. She was staring at him, her eyes wide with terror and, not terror, awe, relief. The rage broke. It evaporated, leaving only a hollow, aching void. A weak, whimpering sound came from the main warehouse. "Bolt!" Emily whispered, scrambling to her feet. She ran past him, out into the warehouse. The puppy was crawling out of the cage, its legs still weak, dragging his hindquarters. "Oh, baby," Emily sobbed, falling to her knees and grabbing the dog, pulling his head to her chest. "You're okay. You're okay." Dominic walked out of the office, his hands shaking, his knuckles raw. He was covered in sweat, rain, and blood. Emily looked up at him, clutching her dog, tears streaming down her face, washing away the grime. He walked over and knelt in front of her, in the filth and the chaos. He was afraid to touch her, afraid he'd break her. She let go of the dog and launched herself at him. She sobered into his arms, her small body shaking violently. "You came," she choked out. I was so scared. The dark." Dominic's arms came around her, crushing her to his tactical vest. He held her as if he could physically push his soul into her, shielding her from the world. He picked her up, her legs wrapping around his waist, and carried her out of that building, into the cleansing, torrential rain. He stood in the storm, his face turned to the sky, just holding her. Bolt, carried by Antonio, was bundled into the SUV. "I've got you," Dominic whispered, his lips against her wet hair. "I've got you. You're safe now. You're safe." He repeated it over and over, a prayer, a promise, a desperate plea. "You are safe." The penthouse was silent. He carried her directly to his bathroom, a cavern of dark marble and chrome. He didn't set her down. He sat her on the counter, his hands still on her, as if afraid she'd disappear. He looked at her. Her lip was split, not by him. Her cheek was bruised. There were rope burns on her wrists. The monster he'd just been in the warehouse stirred, but he beat it down. He turned on the water in the massive tub, steam filling the air. He lit 2 thick, sandalwood-scented candles, then turned off the electric lights. The room was cast in a warm, flickering glow, chasing away all the shadows, but leaving none of the harshness of the light. He turned to her. He gently unbuttoned her coat, then Dominic's own shirt, which was torn and stained. She didn't move, just watched him, her eyes huge. He undressed her slowly, carefully, his fingers noting every new bruise, every mark. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He lifted her, naked and trembling, and lowered her into the scalding water. She sighed, the sound a mix of pain and relief. He took a cloth, dipped it in the water, and began to wash her. He was meticulous. He washed the grime from her hair, his fingers massaging her scalp. He washed the blood from her lip, his touch agonizingly gentle. He washed the filth from her skin. He was not just bathing her. He was performing a ritual. He was erasing the warehouse. He was erasing Varelli. When he was done, he wrapped her in a thick black towel, as big as a blanket, and lifted her again. He carried her into his bedroom, to his bed. He laid her down, and she watched him as he stripped off his own gear, his movements quick. He was bruised, too. The graze on his ribs had reopened. She pointed. "Dominic, you're bleeding again." He looked down, as if just noticing. He grabbed a towel and pressed it to his side. "Let me," she whispered. She got to her knees on the bed, took the towel from him, and tended to his wound, just as she had done before. But it was different. This time, there was no hesitation. He was a killer. He was a monster. He had beaten a man half to death in front of her, and he had knelt in the filth to comfort her dog. He had held her in the rain. He had bathed her like she was a precious, holy thing. She understood. She understood all of him. She finished taping the bandage, her hands lingering on the warm, hard skin of his stomach. "I saw you tonight," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. "In the warehouse. I saw what you are." He flinched, his eyes closing. "Emily, I'm not afraid," she said, cutting him off. She put her hands on his face, forcing him to look at her. "I'm not afraid of you." He searched her face, looking for the lie. He found none. "I'm yours," she said, her voice cracking. "Dominic, I am yours. Truly." The confession broke the last of his control. He kissed her. It was not the reverent, healing kiss he had given her after the gala. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss from the kitchen. This was a kiss of raw, primal possession. It was slow and deep and absolute. It was a brand. His hands were in her hair, his mouth consuming hers. He wasn't testing. He wasn't asking. He was claiming. He laid her back on the sheets, his body caging hers. He loved her with a slowness that was a different kind of intensity. Every touch was deliberate. Every kiss was a vow. He was mapping her body, reclaiming it from the memory of the warehouse, replacing the cold and fear with his heat, his scent, his devotion, and she gave herself to him, not in surrender, but in triumph. She met his passion with her own, her body arching to meet his, her nails digging into his back, anchoring him. It was a raw, emotional collision, a desperate, life-affirming act in the face of death. It was the sealing of a bond, a promise made in the dark and sealed in the light. Later. He held her, her back to his chest, his arm locked around her waist. His breathing was heavy in her ear, and she knew he was not asleep. He was guarding her, even in his own bed. "Go to sleep. Anima mia," he whispered, his voice rough. "I'm here." She closed her eyes. She was in the arms of a killer, a monster and a king, and for the first time in her entire life, she was, in every sense of the word, safe. The rain that had washed the blood from the shipyard pavement had long since dried, but the storm it left behind in the underworld of Westbridge was only just settling. In the days following the rescue, a silence fell over the city, a heavy, terrified quiet that blanketed the streets from the docks to the financial district. It was not a natural silence. It was a decree. Dominic Moretti did not hold a press conference. He did not issue a public statement on the evening news. He simply sent a message, carried by his captains to every corner of the city where business was done in the dark. The message was simple. Emily Ross is under the protection of the Moretti family. To look at her is to look at death. To touch her is to invite a storm that will leave nothing standing. For the first time in decades, the rival families listened. The brutality of what Dominic had done to the men in that warehouse, the sheer unbridled violence unleashed for a single veterinary student, had terrified them. They realized that Emily was not a weakness to be exploited. She was a trigger for a nuclear weapon. inside the penthouse. However, the mood was not one of violence, but of quiet, tender recovery. Emily stood in front of the mirror in the guest bathroom. Though she slept in the master bedroom now, the bruise on her cheek had faded to a faint yellow shadow. The split in her lip was a thin, pink line. She looked like herself again, but there was something new in her eyes, a steeliness, a depth that hadn't been there before. Today was the day she had to face reality. She dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, picked up her backpack, and walked into the living room. Bolt was lying on a plush orthopedic dog bed that cost more than her first car. He was chewing on a squeaky toy shaped like a cannoli. His flank was shaved where the stitches were, and he walked with a slight limp, but his tail thumped rhythmically against the floor when he saw her. "Hey, buddy," she cooed, scratching his ears. "Be a good boy for Dominic." Dominic was at the kitchen island, reading a newspaper, an old-school habit she had learned to love. He looked up, his dark eyes softening instantly. "You don't have to go," he said. It was the third time he had said it that morning. "I have to," Emily sighed. "I haven't been to classes in 2 weeks. I missed midterms. I can't pay the tuition for next semester anyway, especially without the diner job. I have to formally withdraw before they fail me." Dominic folded the paper. "I could make a call." "No," she said firmly. "No Mafia calls the dean. Dominic, I have to do this myself." He stood up, walked over to her, and kissed her forehead. "I'll have Antonio drive you. I can take the bus." He gave her a look. It was a flat, unamused stare that said, "Not in this lifetime." "Fine," she smiled. "Antonio drives." The drive to the university was nostalgic. It felt like she was visiting a life she used to live 100 years ago. When she walked into the administration building, she felt heavy. Being a vet had been her dream since she was 5 years old. Giving it up felt like admitting that the darkness had won. She sat in the hard plastic chair outside Dean Miller's office, clutching her withdrawal forms. "Miss Ross?" the secretary called. "The dean will see you now." Emily walked in, her head low. "Dean Miller, I'm sorry to take up your time. I just need you to sign these. I can't continue the program." Dean Miller, a stern woman with graying hair, looked at her over spectacles. She didn't take the papers. Instead, she opened a drawer and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. "That is unfortunate, Miss Ross," the dean said, "because it seems the university has received a rather substantial endowment in your name." Emily blinked. "What?" "The Bolt Foundation for Veterinary Excellence." The dean read from a letter. "An anonymous donor established it yesterday. It covers full tuition, board, books, and a living stipend for the remainder of your education, on the condition, of course, that you continue your studies." The dean slid the envelope across the desk. "It appears, Miss Ross, that you are fully funded until you earn your doctorate." Emily stared at the envelope. She didn't need to guess who the donor was. She didn't need to ask why the foundation was named after her dog. She walked out of the building in a daze. Antonio was waiting by the curb, holding the back door of the SUV open. "Take me home." "Antonio," she said, her voice trembling. When she stormed into the penthouse, Dominic was on a conference call. He took one look at her face, murmured an excuse to the people on the line, and hung up. "You," she said, pointing a finger at him. Tears were streaming down her face. "Me," he acknowledged calmly. "You paid for it. You paid for everything. I made a donation." "Dominic, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars." He walked around the island, closing the distance between them. "I have spent more on suits I never wore. Money is a tool, Emily. That's all. You have a dream. You have a gift. I watched you stitch my side up with hands that didn't shake. You are meant to heal things." He reached out, wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You saved my life," he whispered. "You saved my sanity. Let me give you this. Please." She looked at him, this powerful, dangerous man who was looking at her with such desperate hope, and she crumbled. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his chest. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you." Bolt, sensing the emotion, barked and trotted over, wedging himself between their legs, demanding to be part of the hug. Dominic laughed, a rich, genuine sound that vibrated through his chest, and reached down to scratch the dog's head. The weeks that followed were the closest thing to peace Dominic Moretti had ever known. Emily went back to school. She studied at the kitchen island while Dominic reviewed contracts. They cooked together. They walked bolt on the roof garden. The penthouse transformed from a sterile fortress into a home. There were dog toys in the hallway, textbooks on the coffee table, and the scent of Emily's vanilla shampoo in the air. But shadows still lingered. One rainy evening, they were sitting on the sofa. The TV was on low, but neither was watching. Dominic was staring at the rain hitting the glass, his expression distant and melancholic. "Where do you go?" Emily asked softly, resting her hand on his arm. "When will you get that look?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "I had a sister," he said quietly. "Sophia." Emily shifted, giving him her full attention. He had never mentioned a sister. "She was light," Dominic said, struggling for the words. "Like you. She loved animals. She hated when I fought. She was 7 years younger than me. My father, he was a hard man. I tried to shield her from the business." He looked down at his hands, hands that had done terrible things. "I failed. When she was 19, a rival family, they wanted to send a message to my father. They took her." His voice cracked. "I was 5 minutes too late. I found her. I held her while she—" He stopped, his jaw working. "I burned the world down after that. I killed everyone involved, but it didn't bring her back. That guilt, it drives me. It tells me I am poisonous, that I destroy beautiful things." He turned his dark eyes to Emily. "That is why I tried to push you away. I was terrified that history was repeating itself, that I would be too late again." Emily's heart broke for the boy he had been and the man he had become. She moved closer, cupping his face in her hands. "You weren't too late," she whispered fiercely. "You found me. You saved me. I almost got you killed. But you didn't. Dominic, look at me." She waited until his eyes locked on hers. "You are not poisonous. You are a protector. You deserve love. You deserve to forgive yourself. Sophia wouldn't want you to be alone in the dark forever." He closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against hers. He let out a shuddering breath, as if he were finally setting down a burden he had carried for 20 years. "I love you," he breathed, the words raw and terrifyingly honest. "I love you," she answered. They kissed, slow and healing. It was a moment of perfect connection, until a wet, cold nose shoved insistently against their joined hands. They broke apart, laughing. Bolt was staring at them, tail wagging, holding his squeaky cannoli. "He has terrible timing," Dominic groaned. But he was smiling. The peace was real. But the world they lived in was still dangerous. Marco Varelli was gone, his organization dismantled, but a few loyalists remained, cockroaches scattering in the light. 1 month later, Dominic took Emily out for dinner. It was their first real public outing. They went to a small, exclusive Italian restaurant owned by a friend of the family. The place was dimly lit, romantic, and guarded by 2 of Dominic's men at the door. They were laughing over wine, discussing Emily's upcoming anatomy exam. For a moment, they were just a normal couple. Then, Emily saw it. It was a reflection in the mirror behind the bar. A waiter, one she hadn't seen before, was approaching their table. He held a wine bottle, but his grip was wrong. It was too tight, and his other hand was reaching into his apron, not for a corkscrew, but for something metallic. She didn't think so. Her instincts, honed by months of living with a predator, took over. "Dominic, 3 o'clock, she hissed, her voice sharp and urgent. Dominic didn't hesitate. He didn't look. He didn't question. He trusted her. He moved with terrifying speed as the fake waiter drew a silenced pistol. Dominic was already out of his chair. He caught the man's wrist in midair, twisting it with a sickening crunch. The gun clattered to the floor. The restaurant went silent. Dominic kicked the man's legs out from under him, pinning him to the floor with a knee to the chest before the man could even scream. Dominic's security team was there a second later, guns drawn, securing the room. Dominic looked down at the assassin, Varelli's younger brother, a desperate man on a suicide mission. "Take him," Dominic said to Antonio, his voice ice cold, "and make sure there is no one left to follow him." He turned to Emily. She was standing by the table, pale but steady. She wasn't trembling. She met his gaze and nodded. "Are you okay?" he asked, moving to her, checking her for injuries. "I saw him in the mirror," she said. "You saved my life," Dominic said, looking at her with a mixture of pride and awe. "I guess we're even," she replied. That night, the last remnants of the Varelli clan were removed from the city. The threat was extinguished, not just for now, but for good. 6 months later, the spring sun was shining over Westbridge Central Park. It was early morning, the air crisp and smelling of blooming jasmine. The park was empty, save for a few joggers and a couple walking a golden retriever. Bolt was fully grown now. He was a majestic, 90-pound beast with a coat like spun gold and a tail that could clear a coffee table in 3 seconds. He was trotting happily between Emily and Dominic, enjoying the freedom of the long leash. Emily breathed in the fresh air. She had finished her semester with straight A's. The nightmare of the warehouse felt like a distant memory, a scar that had faded to white. Dominic was quiet. He'd been quiet all morning. He was wearing a casual cashmere sweater and jeans, looking less like a mafia boss and more like a man at peace. But there was a nervous energy radiating from him. "Bolt looks happy," Dominic said, stating the obvious. "He loves the park," Emily smiled. "He loves that you finally let him chase the squirrels." Dominic stopped walking. They were under the canopy of an old oak tree, the sunlight filtering through the leaves in dappled patterns. "Emily," she turned. "Yeah?" He looked at her. His dark eyes were clear, open, and filled with an emotion so vast it took her breath away. He reached into his pocket. Emily's heart skipped a beat, then another. Dominic Moretti, the shadow of Westbridge, the man who knelt for no one, slowly lowered himself to one knee in the grass. Bolt stopped sniffing a dandelion and sat down, watching them with his head tilted. Dominic pulled out a small, velvet box. He opened it. Inside sat a diamond that was simple, elegant and flawless, just like the life he wanted to give her. "I've spent my life in the dark," Dominic said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought that was all there was. I thought I was destined to be alone." He looked down at the dog, then back up at her. "You chased your dog into my life," he said, a smile touching his lips. "And you brought the light with you. You saved me in every way a man can be saved." He took a breath. "I'm never letting either of you go. Emily Ross, will you marry me?" Emily pressed her hands to her mouth. Tears, hot and happy, spilled over her lashes. She looked at the man who had terrified her, protected her, and loved her. "Yes," she choked out, laughing through the tears. "Yes, Dominic, yes." He stood up and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He pulled her into a kiss that tasted of sunlight and forever. As they kissed, a heavy weight slammed into their legs. Bolt, unable to contain his excitement, had jumped up, his front paws on Dominic's waist, barking happily. His tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. They broke the kiss, laughing. Dominic wrapped one arm around Emily and the other around the dog's neck. "Family," Dominic whispered, looking at them both. "Family," Emily agreed. And in the middle of the park, under the morning sun, the mafia boss, the vet student, and the dog who started it all walked home together, leaving the darkness behind them for good. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey of danger, passion, and the unbreakable bond between two people, and one very stubborn dog. I would love to know what you thought of Emily and Dominic's ending. Did you like how Bolt played a role until the very last moment? Please leave a comment down below and let me know where you are listening from. I love seeing our community grow from all around the world. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to hit that subscribe button for Mafia romance stories so you never miss an upcoming episode. We have many more tales of passion and suspense waiting for you. Share your thoughts in English in the comments. And until next time, keep the romance alive. 8.